All right, so I'm going to put lectures 5 and 6 together because they kind of build on one another, but they're obviously going to be split up into different videos. But the presentation that you're going to have is going to be one coherent handout. So again, if any questions or comments or announcements that you'd like for me to post to the discussion board, I'd be more than happy to do that. Also, there's going to be some interactive stuff on D2L that I'd like for you to partake in, but I'm going to give you a short lecture on individualized rating scales and standardized measures. So behavioral observation measures, again, count how regularly a behavior occurs within a specified period of time, and that matches the operational definition. So behavior observation measures can measure how often a behavior occurs or how long it occurs. So an example of why you might want to do how long it occurs is, as opposed to saying how regular do you go to the gym, how much time you go to the gym is probably a little bit more accurate and valid, right? Because what happens if you go to the gym for 5 minutes? Is that the same as going to the gym for 2 hours? Obviously not. So it might be more valid to say how many minutes have you spent in the gym, right? Because that talks about duration as opposed to frequency. Behavior observation measures can be performed by the client, the practitioner, or the relevant other. Again, so sometimes you're going to be filling out one of these for the client. Sometimes they'll fill it out for themselves. Sometimes they might be doing it for a child. So it all depends on the context, right? Behavioral observation measures can be very simple instruments. So I'm going to talk about individualized rating scales, and they're really, really basic. Not a whole lot to them. It's not rocket science. You don't have to take a course to do it. Some of them are really basic, but can provide you with really great information. And in order to make sure they're accurate, it involves specifically defining what the behavior is in terms of number of times the behavior occurs, number of arguments per week, what constitutes studying. So in the past, people have talked about, okay, I'm going to measure how many minutes I'm studying per week. But that could be a few different things, right? What if you're looking at Facebook or playing with your phone? Specifying exactly what that looks like is going to help you to come up with a better definition of what the behavior is that you're trying to measure. So regardless if you're using a frequency or a duration measure, behavioral observations involve continuous recording plan or behavioral sampling. So again, a continuous recording plan is something that somebody's filling out at the end of every day or every week. But behavioral sampling is something more like dropping in on a student during school to see how many behavioral outbursts they're having. That can be a little bit more challenging for the kid to fill out themselves, right? So it's something that you would look at a sample of what their behavior looks like at a typical time of day. So as we're getting into our measurement, we're going to be going back to this big picture and looking at more behavioral observations and individualized rating scales. So an individualized rating scale, IRS, is a form of measurement that's one of the more simple versions to use. So an individualized rating scale measures the intensity of the client's problem. So an example might be a seriousness of a client's problem on a scale of 1 through 5. Importance of changing a behavior. So it could be like a motivational interviewing type thing. How motivated are you to change right now on a scale of 1 through 5? What would it take for you to get to a 5? Why aren't you at a 0? Using these to kind of help lead your clinical practice, but also can be a good single system design measurement tool. It can also help you to assess the intensity of a problem or the ease at which the client believes their problem can be resolved. So here's an example. The importance of changing alcohol or drug behaviors. Is it not important to you at all? Is it extremely important? And on a scale 1 through 9, where does the client fall? Here's an example of something that I would give to somebody who is recently hospitalized. Their extent of their suicidal ideation, with 1 being no desire to self-harm, they're completely fine, versus 5 feeling like they have strong urges to self-harm and they probably need to seek help, right? So this could be used after discharge from inpatient hospitalization. Maybe a parent could check in with the child to see, okay, are they safe? Do we need to consider having a higher level of care? And it would be a simple way for them to check in every day. Just a key point here is that individualized rating scales generally tend to be less valid, reliable, and direct. And why do you think that might be? So as opposed to a standardized measure that's been standardized through research and practice, individualized rating scales being individualized haven't really been researched so much. It's something really specific to the client's problem, and there could be some systematic errors. But in order to help create or improve the validity, you would want to create the individualized rating scale with the client. So by creating it with the client, They can give feedback about whether or not they found it to be accurate or to be measuring what they think they want to measure or what they want to change. So again, this is an example of an individualized rating scale of pain. 0, 1 hurts a little, all the way up to 5 hurts worse. So this is an example of child pain that you've probably seen in a medical office somewhere, probably pediatrician's office. But by explaining it, and even with the faces here, helps the client to understand what the individualized rating scale means. And so also a few more things when thinking about an individualized rating scale is selecting the rating dimensions. So dimensions mean, as opposed to univariate dimension, like my height, just one dimension up and down. Depression might have multiple dimensions like hopelessness, stress, loss of interest. So choosing what dimensions you want to measure and why is going to help you to construct an accurate individualized rating scale. Also the number of response categories. So as opposed to saying on a scale of 1 to 1,000, how much pain are you having? Having a scale of 1 through 5 might be a little bit more easy for a child to digest, right? So it's generally best to choose between 1 to 11, or maybe 1 to 10, or 1 to 5. But choosing response categories that are within reason. And by creating equidistance response categories just means that the distance between 1 and 2 is the same as 2 and 3, and 3 and 4, and so on. So this is an example of an individualized rating scale for a self-harming client. So this is the severity of their intensity, or the intensity of their feelings to self-harm, and then number of weeks on the bottom. So from week to week, the clinician's been asking the person to rate the intensity of their urges to self-harm here. So it looks like in week 1 and 2, it's up at a 6, and kind of by week 8, 9, it's all the way down to about a 5. So again, one of the last steps is creating anchors. So anchor would be, again, if we're going to go on a scale of 1 through 10, giving an anchor might be 1 is no pain, 3 is some pain, 5 is moderate pain, 7 is intense pain, and 10 is extreme pain. So specifying what each of those numbers along the way mean. And sometimes people will give an anchor for every single category. So this one you can see very happy to happy, sad, upset, angry, rage. This has an anchor for every single step along the way. But sometimes people will just have a few anchors along the way and then let the client decide what the rest of the numbers mean. So for your discussion post, again, I'd like for you to come up with an idea for your own individualized rating scale. Pretty easy to do, and it's something that's really simple that you could use for your final project. And again, just some examples. How important would you say it is for you to make these changes on a scale of 0 to 10? You could follow that up with why you're not at a 10? What would it take for you to get to a 10? Why aren't you at a 0? Why you've got no motivation? And then kind of using that motivation that they do have to maybe try to promote them to get up to the 10 to change. Again, that's kind of just like a motivational interviewing technique.